penny is dying, not in theory, not in some distant policy debate. Right now in Washington, the paperwork is already moving. And while most Americans are laughing this off as pocket change news, a much bigger story is hiding in plain sight. Because when a government quietly kills one coin, it rarely stops there. The next coin in line is one you probably have sitting in a jar right now. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why that coin may already be worth more than the number stamped on its face. Stay with us, because what happens next could change how you look at spare change forever. Welcome back to Precious Metals Intelligence, the channel built for those who prefer to see change coming before it arrives. If you're new here, this is where economic shifts, monetary policy, and quiet decisions made in Washington get broken down calmly, clearly, and without the noise. No panic, no hype. They're just the facts, laid out the way a serious decision maker deserves to have them laid out. Before we go further, we'd love to know where in the world you're watching from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below. It's always remarkable to see just how far this conversation about money, value, and preparation travels. And if this kind of analysis is useful to you, consider staying close to the channel. This isn't content built for entertainment. It's built for people who like to stay one step ahead. Now, let's get into it. For more than 200 years, the penny sat quietly in the pockets of everyday Americans. Nobody thought twice about it. It was tossed into jars, left on counters, and dropped into tip cups without a second glance. But in late 2025, something changed. The United States Mint pressed its final penny. No ceremony, no headlines that stayed in the news for long. Just a quiet stop in production of a coin that had existed since the very first days of the Republic. Most people did not notice. Life went on. Coffee was still bought, change was still given. But behind the scenes, in the halls of Washington, lawmakers were making a decision that would end an era of American currency. The vehicle behind this shift has a name that sounds almost too simple for something this significant. It is called the Common Sense Act. On the surface, it appears to be a small piece of legislation. It allows businesses to round cash transactions to the nearest 5 cents instead of requiring exact change down to the penny. It passed the House of Representatives by an overwhelming majority. It now sits before the Senate, waiting for its next step. But to understand why this matters, it helps to ask a simple question. Why would a government stop making a coin that has existed for over 2 centuries? The answer is not political. It is not ideological. It comes down to basic arithmetic. It now costs the United States Mint more than 3.5 cents to produce a single penny. Let that sink in for a moment. A coin worth 1 cent costs almost 4 times its face value just to manufacture. Every single penny made has been, in a very real sense, a small financial loss for the government. Multiply that loss across billions of coins produced every year, and the numbers start to add up in ways that are difficult to ignore. This is not a new problem. For years, analysts and economists quietly pointed to the rising cost of coin production. Copper prices climbed, zinc prices climbed. The materials that make up a modern penny became more expensive, even as the coin itself remained frozen at a value of 1 cent. Eventually, the math simply stopped working. So the government made a decision. Rather than continue producing a coin that loses money with every strike, the mint quietly stepped away from it. The penny will still be legal. It will still be usable. Businesses are not being told to reject it, but new pennies will no longer enter circulation. Slowly, over time, the coin will become rarer. It will fade from cash registers, from pockets, from everyday life. This is where the story becomes important for anyone who thinks strategically about money. The United States has never done this before, not with a circulating coin. Other countries have gone down this road first. Canada eliminated its penny back in 2012, citing the exact same reasoning now being used in Washington. Australia and New Zealand made similar moves years earlier. The United States has simply been slower to follow a pattern that has already played out elsewhere in the world. But here's the detail that most casual observers are missing. The retirement of the penny is not really about the penny at all. It is about a much larger question the government is now being forced to confront. If the cheapest coin in the system can no longer justify its own existence, what happens to the coin sitting right above it? That coin is the nickel. And unlike the penny, the nickel's problem is not a small one. It is not a matter of a coin barely losing money. It is a coin that costs the government more than double its face value to produce. Every 5-cent piece made today comes at a real financial cost, one that dwarfs even what the penny was losing before it was phased out. This is the quiet warning hidden inside a story that most people are treating as minor news. The death of the penny is not the end of this conversation. It is the beginning of it. It is the first sign of a much larger shift taking place inside the American monetary system, one that history suggests rarely stops at just one coin. In the next part of this story, the numbers behind that shift will be laid out clearly, showing exactly why the nickel finds itself in a position even more fragile than the coin that came before it. Ask any American what a nickel is worth, and the answer comes fast: 5 cents. Everyone knows this. It has been true for over a century, and nobody has ever had a reason to question it. But value on paper and value in reality are not always the same thing. And once the numbers behind the nickel are laid out clearly, the gap between what this coin says it is worth and what it actually costs to exist becomes impossible to ignore. The modern nickel is made from a blend of two metals: 75% copper, 25% nickel. This composition has remained largely unchanged for generations, which is part of why so few people have ever stopped to think about it. It looks the same as it always has. It feels the same in the hand. But the world around that little coin has shifted dramatically, even if the coin itself has not. Copper prices have climbed steadily over the past several decades. Nickel, the metal, has followed a similar path, driven by global industrial demand that has nothing to do with pocket change and everything to do with electronics, construction, and manufacturing. These are metals the entire world wants, and when global demand rises, the cost of anything made from those metals rises with it. This creates a strange and uncomfortable reality. The United States Mint now spends more than 13 cents to produce a coin that can only be spent as 5 cents. That is not a small loss. That is a coin costing well over 2.5 times its own face value to bring into existence. Compare that to the penny, the coin already being phased out. At the time production stopped, the penny was costing just under 4 cents to make, against a face value of 1 cent. That is roughly a fourfold loss. The nickel, by comparison, holds a similar ratio of cost to value. In some ways, its economic problem is even more exposed, simply because so many more nickels are produced and circulated every single year. This is where the story stops being about spare change and starts becoming a strategic economic signal. The United States is not the first country to face this exact dilemma. Canada eliminated its penny back in 2012, citing production costs that had become impossible to justify. Australia and New Zealand made similar decisions with their own smallest coins years before that. In every case, the pattern was the same. Every retired coin leaves behind a lesson, and if history is a reliable teacher, the lesson from the penny's exit points directly at the nickel. To understand why, it helps to look at what actually happens when a government decides a coin has become too expensive to keep making. It rarely disappears overnight. Instead, it goes through a slow and predictable transformation. The materials change first. Expensive metals get replaced with cheaper ones. The coin gets a new internal makeup, even if its outer appearance barely changes. This process even has a name among economists and coin collectors. It is called debasement, and it has a long history stretching back thousands of years, long before modern currency ever existed. The penny already went through this exact process once before. Decades ago, it was made almost entirely of copper. Today, it is mostly zinc, with only a thin copper coating on the outside. To an untrained eye, it looks the same. In reality, its internal value dropped sharply the moment that formula changed. The coin kept its face, but lost much of its substance. Now, with the penny stepping out of production entirely, attention naturally shifts to the coin standing next in line. And the nickel fits the pattern almost perfectly. Its current cost to produce, sitting well above 13 cents against a 5-cent face value, cannot continue indefinitely. Governments do not tolerate ongoing financial losses on something as basic as coin production, especially not when a clear precedent for solving the problem already exists. The playbook has already been written. It was written with the penny. This is where the Common Sense Act becomes more than a piece of paperwork about rounding cash transactions. Its rounding provisions are not just a convenience for cash registers. They represent something larger. They show how policymakers are beginning to think about small denomination currency as a whole. Once a government builds a legal framework for rounding away pennies, that same framework becomes far easier to extend when the next coin runs into the same financial wall. There's a quieter detail hidden inside this shift that deserves attention. When a business owner rounds a transaction to the nearest 5 cents, the nickel becomes the new smallest practical unit of cash exchange. It takes on the role the penny used to play. That means far more nickels will move through the economy, not fewer. More production, more material cost, more pressure on a coin that is already losing money with every strike. In other words, the very policy designed to solve the penny problem may end up accelerating the nickel problem. This is the part of the story that rarely makes headlines because it requires connecting two events that seem unrelated on the surface. One coin retiring, another coin's transaction role expanding. But for anyone paying close attention to how monetary systems evolve over time, the connection is not a coincidence. It is a pattern that is played out again and again throughout history whenever a government reaches the point where the cost of making money exceeds the value of the money itself. None of this means the nickel will disappear tomorrow. Legislative change moves slowly, and the Senate has not yet acted on the bill currently in front of it. But the direction of travel is becoming difficult to argue with. The nickel sits today exactly where the penny stood several years ago. Same warning signs, same cost imbalance, same quiet buildup of financial pressure that eventually forces a decision. The coin sitting in pockets across the country right now may be treated, for now, as ordinary. But ordinary is often the last word used to describe something right before it changes. The penny was ordinary too, right up until the moment it wasn't. What happens next depends on decisions still being made in Washington. But the economic pressure behind those decisions is already public record, already measurable, and already pointing in one clear direction. The next part of this story turns to a much bigger pattern, one that stretches far beyond a single coin and explains why paying attention to moments like this one has mattered throughout economic history. Step back far enough, and the story of the penny and the nickel stops being about coins at all. It becomes a story about how monetary systems behave over time, and about a pattern that has repeated itself across centuries, long before either of these coins ever existed. Throughout history, governments facing rising costs and shrinking resources have turned to the same basic tool. They have quietly reduced the value packed inside their own currency, while keeping the face value exactly the same. Ancient Rome did this with its silver coins, gradually mixing in cheaper metals until coins that once held real silver content held barely a trace of it. The change happened so slowly that most people using the coins never noticed, until the damage was already done. The pattern has repeated in nearly every era since, under different governments, different currencies, and different economic pressures. The method changes, the underlying behavior does not. The United States is not immune to this pattern. It has simply moved more slowly than other nations, and often more quietly. The penny's exit is the clearest modern example, but it is not an isolated one. Silver was once a normal part of everyday American coins, present in dimes, quarters, and half dollars. That changed in 1965, when rising silver prices made the old formula too expensive to sustain. The coins kept their names, they kept their appearance, but their internal value changed permanently, and most people barely registered the shift while it was happening. This is the part of the pattern that matters most for anyone thinking strategically. The coins that still contain real, meaningful metal content, coins made before these quiet formula changes, have consistently held value independent of the number stamped on their face. A pre-1965 silver coin is not worth 10 cents or 25 cents today. It is worth whatever its silver content commands in the current market, often many times its original face value. The same principle applied to the copper penny before production shifted to zinc. Coins with real material substance do not lose value when a government changes its mind about a coin's future. They simply become worth more than their label suggests. This raises an uncomfortable but important question. If the nickel is now standing exactly where the penny stood a few years ago, and if history shows that coins facing this kind of cost pressure eventually get redesigned with cheaper materials, what does that mean for the nickels currently sitting in drawers, jars, and cash registers across the country right now? It means those coins, made today with their current copper and nickel content, may be holding more real value than their 5-cent label suggests. Not because of speculation, not because of hype, simply because of the raw material cost already documented by the US Mint itself. The math is not hidden. It is publicly available, sitting quietly in government reports, waiting for someone to connect the dots. This is where the difference between reacting and recognizing becomes important. Most people only notice a shift like this after it has already happened, after the coin has already changed, after the opportunity to understand its significance has already passed. A smaller number of people notice the pattern while it is still forming, while the coin in question still looks completely ordinary to everyone else. The penny offered that window once. For those paying attention, it offered years of advance notice before its production quietly ended. The nickel may be offering that same window right now, while the debate in the Senate is still unresolved, and while the coin itself has not yet changed. History does not promise that the nickel will follow the exact same path. But it does show, again and again, that this exact pattern rarely stops with just one coin. The final part of this story brings all of these threads together and looks closely at what this moment may mean for those paying attention early, rather than after the fact.